Throughout the Napoleonic Wars, most of the European powers were busy. The notable exception to this was the Ottoman Empire, which, with the exception of a brief invasion by France in 1798, mostly stayed out of the wider war. However, with two of its major rivals busy, defeated and weakened, why didn't the Ottoman Empire try to take advantage? Why didn't the Ottomans capitalise on the Napoleonic Wars? So, at the end of the 18th century, the Ottomans only had one European country that they liked: France. The Franco-Ottoman alliance was a century-spanning on and off friendship that served their interests. As such, it would make sense that when the French Revolution began and its new leaders would be embroiled in a decade and a half of war, that the Ottomans would be an obvious ally. For France, them joining would help to tie up Austrian and Russian troops, and for the Ottomans it gave them an opportunity to expand to the north and the east. So why didn't this happen? Well, it wasn't for a lack of trying. As of the 1793 unroyaling of France, the Ottomans were on a bit of a downward trend. For the past 50 years, it hadn't won a major war against any great power, and its territory had been slowly shrinking. And the reason for this was that the Ottoman army was now massively outdated, which was mostly due to the Janissaries. Originally an elite unit of the Ottoman army made up of eunuchs who were loyal only to the Sultan, the Janissaries had since then won many more privileges by rebelling, ousting sultans and removing people who opposed them. To make matters worse, their usefulness on the battlefield had come to an end in the face of superior European tactics and equipment. The Ottoman Sultan, Selim III, had approached France to get them to help modernise the military. But with its king gone, the Ottomans had to rely on the new guys, who did less helping and more invading. This invasion was led by Napoleon Bonaparte, who sought to establish France in the Middle East, ultimately with a view of threatening British India. The French initially did well, but after Britain's involvement, Napoleon went home to overthrow the French government. He left his army there, which surrendered to the Ottomans in 1801. This obviously didn't help Franco-Ottoman relations, but over the next 14 years, the Ottomans never joined the French or fought against them. So why? Well, whilst the Austrians were traditional rivals of Constantinople, after their previous war they had made it clear that they had no intention of expanding south anymore and so wanted a stable border. This allowed the Ottomans to move troops elsewhere, and for the Sultans, having at least one peaceful border was too useful to risk with a war. So in spite of having just pushed France out, Ottoman casualties were massive compared to the French. Because as technology and tactics advanced, the Ottoman previous advantage of being able to field gigantic armies was less useful. As such, the Sultan used this as a pretext to ignore Janissary objections and begin a multi-year process of reforming the army. Naturally, the Janissaries were afraid of losing their privileged position. However, they recognised the need for reform, by which I mean they ousted the Sultan and soon offed him. He was replaced by Mustafa IV, who was promptly deposed and murdered in a counter-coup. Anyway, for years, both sides of the Napoleonic conflict had been trying to get the Ottomans on side. But after Austerlitz, the Ottomans saw Napoleon as the likely victor and so refused to make an alliance with Moscow. In response, Russia invaded and occupied these lands, which Napoleon promised to return, until he didn't. The Ottomans didn't really trust anybody after this, but they were still at war with Russia. In 1812, Russia pushed for peace, and the Ottomans, believing that there was no sense in holding out, agreed to cede these lands. And 1 month later, Napoleon launched his invasion of Russia, which would have been useful to the Ottomans but demonstrated that France neither trusted them nor needed them. And when combined with the weakening of the Ottoman army from 6 years of war, any more incursions would have to wait. By which time, Napoleon was losing. And so joining him would have been a bad idea, and joining the coalition against him would have gained the Ottomans absolutely nothing. I hope you enjoyed this episode with a special thanks to my patrons: James Bizanet, Sky Chappelle, Kartoitska, Yuduan Wang, Anthony Beckett, YN Hockey, AF Firefly, Alex Schwinn, Captain Psydog, Gustav Swan, The McWhopper, Robert C. Perkins, The Flying Deutschland, Cardinal Blue, Rod D. Martin, Marvin Cassow, Spencer Lightfoot, Shuenin, Maggie Patskowski, Mirza Ahmed, Copper Tone, Michael Holbert, Castle Bravo, Spinning Three Plates, Andy McGeehee, Arthur Hosey Jr., Danny Atanasio, Camoon Yoon, Winston Kaywood, Remco Heusman, Jim Stromberg, Beck to Bot, Charles I, and Lord Beak.